From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Urban Outlook.
And hello and welcome to Urban Outlook. I'm April Eaton. Thank you so much for being with us today. Now that most schools are on summer break, it may be a time for a debrief, if you will, to recap and see how things are going in those school systems. One topic that may be a focus across the country is based on a recent study on the lack of Black and Hispanic students tapped for gifted programs. According to the work by a Vanderbilt professor and a doctoral student, Jason Grissom and Christopher Redding, African-American third graders are half as likely as whites to be included in programs for gifted students. And the numbers are nearly the same for Hispanic students. All the while, public schools around the country are seeing their classrooms more diverse, more faces of color in those classrooms. So why are we seeing that we may have more diverse schools, but a lack of diversity in those gifted programs? What's happening here? Joining me to discuss this topic, two experts in all of this stuff as far as gifted students are concerned and where our African American students stand. Dr. Donna Ford, who is a professor of education at human development at Vanderbilt University. Your focus is on recruitment and retention of racially different students, particularly in gifted education and advanced placement programs around the country. And Professor Gilman Whiting, an associate professor of African American and Diaspora Studies and Director of Graduate Studies at Vanderbilt University, also an expert in an area of all sorts of things that impact our people, we might say. Thank you both for being here. We appreciate that. Now, this study has seemed to get lots of attention. I think there was a piece in New York Times. I saw another story in The Atlantic where we're trying to figure out why there's such a disparity of the makeup of students in gifted and talented programs. What are you all both seeing?
Well, this is a study that's getting a lot of attention, and it should get a lot of attention. But this is something that the two of us have been working on and for years, for over 20 years. So we're glad to see that it's getting the attention. Gifted education is a way to resegregate our schools in many ways. It's a product, I think, of white flight. It's a way to appease the status quo. There are some high-income parents and some white parents who really don't want low-income students or students of color sitting with their children. And so they really push for gifted programs, and administration, unfortunately, often supports that. So we have a resegregation of our schools in 2016 and every other year, based on race and based on income too.
But Dr. Ford, then that would mean that we're not doing fair testing across the board, because how do gifted programs work? How does a student test into or get tapped for a gifted program?
Well, one thing that needs to be clear, there is no federal mandate for gifted education. So with special education, there's a federal mandate, and there's consistency across the states. But when it comes to gifted education, it's a state-by-state or district-by-district decision about how students will be identified, what the criteria will be, and what the instruments will be used. Now, so Ava, you just mentioned testing. That is huge, and I think a huge contributing problem, and let's talk about that a little bit more. But in our work, we argue that teacher bias, which is also part of the Grissom and Redding, a major part of the Grissom and Redding study. Teacher bias is the #1 reason in our experiences, and we've got other data to demonstrate that. For underrepresentation, teachers are not referring, especially Black students and our Black males, for gifted programs. First and foremost, the most underrepresented children are African American students, then Black males. Teachers are not referring them. Or if referral is not part of the process, there's a checklist that often teachers have to complete. They give Black students the lowest ratings. And so it's about subjectivity. Then we could talk about testing.
Wow, so they're not using grades, and I see you shaking your head over there, Professor Whiting, so you've got some agreement on this front. Seeing the same kind of thing in classrooms where the teachers are sort of giving an unfair assessment of one student versus the other?
Well, good morning and thank you.
Good morning and thank you.
I think, like my colleague Donna Ford said, is that there are multiple factors. One thing about the article, to focus on it, one of the first things they discuss in the article, which came out in the conversation, I believe first, was that there are evidence that shows that there are difference in scores. So we immediately although we have all the other reasons, the first thing we say in the article is that somehow or another they're not academically prepared like other students.
Right.
That is what we call a deficit perspective. We look at the preparation of the students beforehand. And even before that, we look at the preparation of the teachers who come out of schools who look for gifts and talents in students. A very talkative, a very verbose student named John he has a great, vocabulary. Maybe he should be looked at for giftedness. Now, if his name was, give it a African American sounding name, and has the same kind of verbosity, he ends up in special education. So we've looked at, in some of our work with the Scholar Identity Institute, with the 100 Kings from the 100 Black Men of Tennessee, we looked at some work with kids who had GPAs who were down at 1.0 GPAs, and who kids who was extended 4.0 on the GPA scale. And we found out, looking at nonverbal tests, that we had gifted kids at the lower end of this thing. So we know they're there. We always knew they were there. And I think that has a lot to do with how one sees the kid in the first place, their actions. Because after all, the teacher tends to be the first point of departure for getting that child in there. Parents should be, but teachers are the ones who actually said, well, we need to have them tested, possibly.
Well, can parents be that point person? Because you see things in your child too. Now, we may be biased, right? Because we all think our own kids are great. But we may see things in our children, characteristics in our children that we think are at the gifted range. So can parents push and change the fact that teachers have to be the ones to select all the time?
So again, that varies by state and by district. Sometimes parents are allowed to refer their children for gifted education services. Too often, African American, Hispanic parents, and low-income parents don't even know they have that choice. So again, it's by district, state by state, whether you can do that. Now, one reality is that even if states or districts do not allow parents to refer their children, somehow the higher income families find a way to get their children recognized, to get in the screening pool, to be identified.
Gotcha.
So that's where that social capital and cultural, capital comes in, because they have that clout to be able to go to the teacher, the gifted education coordinator, the principal, somebody to say, hey, take a look at my child, even if a teacher has not recognized that child. So it's a double-edged sword. There is research saying that overall, and sometimes they don't really look at race, but overall, parents tend to be better evaluators of children for gifted education than the teachers. But it becomes problematic when parents know how to, play
work the system.
Work the system. That's the word I'm looking for. When they know how to work the system, and others don't. So some parents get advantaged and others don't. But when you have parents who really don't know a lot about gifted education, that we tend to be more humble and even underrate or underestimate our children's abilities. But then you got the higher income who overestimate and over-evaluate their children. They know how to answer those questions, but others don't know how to answer those questions.
See, now you're touching on something, because I was getting ready to say, if you are sort of forcing a student into the gifted mold where they may not be gifted, but for the same reasons that you're talking about. These are parents that know how to work the system. They've got the economic power behind them. They get their students in. Aren't you, in essence, setting that student up to fail, no matter who he or she is?
You could be setting them up for failure, but when the teachers are predominantly white in schools and in gifted programs, we're talking about 85% of teachers being white, they're going to be evaluating children that look like them, so they're more likely, and the data bears it out, they're more likely to go ahead and give that child the higher ratings as well, as opposed to say African American and Hispanic students. So it becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If a white parent, especially a higher income white parent, nominates their child, refers their child, likely that child's going to be identified, and teachers going to have high expectations from that. So there's a huge body of research on expectations, the self-fulfilling prophecy. If a teacher is told that a child is gifted, they tend to see that child is gifted. If they're told a child is not gifted, which tends to be a child looks like me, then they don't see that child is gifted. Even despite the data despite the data, which is also, you know, part of that study by Grissom and Redding and what we've been doing.
I want to talk more about that data. We're going to take a quick commercial break. You've got a page full of numbers there. I want to get through some of those numbers and sort of really lay this out on what this means and some solutions for our parents and our families out there who may be struggling with this very topic. We'll be right back after this.